So as I'm sure you're aware, we're definitely getting stuck into the second part of the year, the second half of the year. Christmas will be here before we know it, as will summer. I had been thinking summer was on its way. Today has proven that to be a bit of a false alarm. But I was thinking about this being into the second half of the year and casting my mind back to my time here as a seminarian, which is 4 years ago. Some of you might remember that I was here. Don't know about you. If you did remember, you might not, but that's totally fine. 4 years feels like a long time. I feel like it's gone pretty quickly. And I was reflecting a bit on that experience, and particularly of my experience before I came up here. I'd been a few years in Melbourne. I hadn't quite gotten used to the Melbourne winters. I was talking to a friend during the week and was saying how we'd had such lovely weather here, and he said, "Oh, it's been lovely in Melbourne too." And I said, "Oh, how warm has it been?" And said, "It's been great. A number of the days have been getting up to 15 degrees. So I told him we'd be getting 23, 24 degrees here, and he was kind of shaken up by that. But that's beside the point. But I remember this experience of being there, looking towards coming here as a seminarian up to Sydney. And I had this distinct experience that I was probably maybe 5 years into my time with the missionaries. So in some sense, that's not a whole lot of time, given, God willing, I've got a whole many years ahead of me. But there was a sense, I was in my late 20s, and I couldn't really quite get a grasp or remember what my life was like before I joined the Brothers. Sure, I knew bits and pieces and all of that sort of stuff, but the memory of day-to-day life had started to fade a little bit. I really couldn't quite remember what normal was for me back then. But at the same time, as I looked towards the future, me standing here right now as a priest seemed like a million miles away. So I was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, if you will, that I couldn't really see the beginning and I couldn't really see the end. All I was left with was this weird, terribly weathered experience of being sort of caught in the middle and being a little bit kind of like, oh, I'm so far away from either one way or the other, and it's all a bit sort of funny. And I think there's something kind of universal about this experience, particularly when it comes to the idea of faith, that no matter how we came to our faith, whether we had some big light bulb experience, maybe we went to Alpha or something like Alpha and our life was changed, or we had something like that, where we came to faith almost kind of in a really kind of momentous sort of way, or even if you've sort of journeyed with faith and it's kind of always been there, that no matter where or how we've come to faith, we can experience the ups and downs and the trials and the pitfalls of everything in between. And we kind of go, okay, well, we journey for a little while and heaven eternity feels like it's an eternity away, but we kind of look back and we kind of can lose sight and forget our origin story, so to speak, that we can think, well, I don't necessarily remember about what exactly was kind of happening when my faith became really important to me, that we can forget about maybe that encounter or that experience we had with Jesus that helped us to go, okay, you know what, I want to take this faith stuff a little bit more seriously. That we can lose sight of and forget both our origin and our end, which is both the initial and hopefully the forever encounter with Jesus. And what can happen in the midst of that, particularly when we're beset by the struggles of life, the things which come and knock us off kilter, whether they're big things or little things or everything in between, that we can lose sight and we can lose hope. That we can have this experience where we know we're on the journey, we're plodding along and it's all kind of, we're doing our thing and going through the motions in a certain respect, but that original fire is kind of gone and we don't see that, we can't remember, we can't touch that as closely. And when we go through those trials and tribulations, they maybe get a little bit tougher to face the further away we get from that initial experience. The story of the Transfiguration that we're given today, of Jesus revealing himself atop Mount Tabor, speaks directly into this reality, I think. That we see here Jesus with Peter, James and John, these three that he was particularly close with. And if you think about their experience, right, a lot's happened. A lot's gone on in the days and weeks and months since that day where Jesus called them by the shores of the sea to leave their boats behind and to follow him. And you may be sure it's been a big 6 months for them, or a year, or however long it was, but it's been a big week for them too, right? Immediately preceding this, the week before, 6 days before is what Matthew tells us, is that these guys were a little bit further north in a town called Caesarea Philippi. This is a place settled and built by the Roman Empire to give glory and honour to Caesar as the Lord of the world, as the Son of God, as the shining sun. It's the very place where Peter makes that declaration, where Jesus says, well, who do you say I am? And Peter kind of pulls out of thin air and says, well, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. I mean, I often wonder if Peter goes, well, gee, that sounded pretty good. I should write that down, right? That seems like it's a pretty pithy summary. That Peter makes this declaration of Jesus' lordship, but it's also the place where Jesus turns their expectations of what that Messiah would look like. He turns it all upside down. They think Jesus is going to come and storm Jerusalem by force and be installed as king in the like of David and Solomon. Well, Jesus is saying, well, no, you've got it completely the wrong way around. I'm going to turn that all upside down. And he's saying, my road to glory, my road to kingship, my road to fulfilling my call to be the Messiah goes directly to Jerusalem, but it goes through Calvary, through suffering, and through death. So all that's in the mix. So they've had a pretty big week, right? And I want you just to sort of imagine with me what that experience would be like for these three guys. They've left everything behind. They've had this initial experience, and now things are kind of going a little bit different than what they might have anticipated. So they're sort of wrestling with all this sort of stuff, probably feeling like they're in the midst of a washing machine. I don't think they knew what washing machines were, but you get the point, right? That they're in the midst of this reality, and then Jesus invites them up to the mountain. And there's three things I want to draw out of their experience on the mountain that's going to help us, I think, enter into this feast in a new way. And the first is transfiguration as revelation. That these three disciples encountered Jesus in what we're told, and is understandably so, an overwhelming and awe-inspiring way. Jesus' face is shining like the sun. His clothes are white. There's a cloud, there's a voice. Moses and Elijah are thrown in there for good measure. That all these things are happening. I can imagine it would have been kind of pandemonium in a certain sense. And not only had the week been tough, all these sort of things are going on, but all these things are happening to point to one truth and one reality, which is the revelation of the glory of Jesus, who's the Son of God, the Messiah, the one who is anointed and sent by the Father. That in this moment, Jesus is revealed to the disciples in all of his glory. And there's a multitude of allusions in the text to various, what we call theophanies, these encounters with the Lord, and particularly to Moses' encounter with God on Mount Sinai. But the one key distinction that Matthew makes, that makes it a little bit different from all these other experiences, and particularly Moses' experience, is that Moses merely reflected the glory of God that he encountered. When Moses comes down the mountain with his face shining, that it's not his glory, that he's reflecting God's glory. The reality, though, is in Jesus we encounter the God himself, God who shines with and in his own glory. And so Jesus is revealing here to the disciples his identity as God and Saviour, as Lord and Messiah. He's saying, Pete, you got it right. You sorted it out. It wasn't some random idea, but what you've said I was just 6 days ago, I'm showing you that you were on the money. Jesus isn't changed into anything different at the Transfiguration, but simply it's the revelation of the glory that he always has had within him. And so amidst the dazzling clothes and the Lord's transfigured appearance and Moses and Elijah being there, Peter eventually speaks up. But his question or his inquiry of the Lord betrays his thinking. He thinks, we've kind of made it. That was pretty easy. Peter, who's always kind of keen to avoid the crossroad, he goes, well, that only took 6 days. That wasn't as bad as Jesus made out to be. We're kind of here. We're on the mountain. Why don't we set up here, set up shop and stay here forever? But no sooner than he does that, than the cloud, the sign of God's voice and presence, envelops him. And just as in Jesus' baptism, they're told that Jesus is the beloved Son of the Father. But they're given one added instruction, and that is to listen to him. And that points to our second point, that the Transfiguration is for us strength for our own journey of discipleship. That this invitation to listen to Jesus, this instruction, harkens back to Jesus' call upon them when they're at the seashore, to follow him. That this instruction is simply a call to discipleship. The Father calls and invites and reaffirms the call that Jesus has placed upon them, that they'd follow him along the road that leads to Calvary. And the fact that because it's going to Calvary that they need this strength. Jesus is saying, well, look, we've got a long road ahead of us, and I understand that you might have doubts and questions, but the fundamental thing that you need to know is that this is who I am. That I'm revealing to you that what you have said about me a week ago is going to be true for me. It's true. It was true then. It's true today, and it's going to be true in a little while's time when we're being put through the ringer in Jerusalem. And this is fundamentally important. That the Transfiguration is strength for the journey, and it's Jesus' deliberate showing himself to the disciples to strengthen them for what's ahead. It strengthens them to face whatever will come as they respond and follow Jesus on the narrow path of missionary discipleship. So that's our second point, that the Transfiguration gives us strength for the journey. And so in the face of all of this, of the cloud and the shining voices and clouds and lights and clothes and Moses and Elijah, eventually the disciples, they fall on their face in fear. And then they're met with the gentle, compassionate touch of Jesus. It says Jesus came up and touched them and said, "Do not be afraid." So the third thing to draw out of this story then is that the disciples were touched by glory. This revelation and this strengthening that the disciples experienced is not just for the mountain, not simply a memory that they could draw on and pull out of their back pocket whenever things were getting tough. That they were touched by Jesus and they came down the mountain with him. The essential point here is that we don't only encounter Jesus and his glory on the mountaintop. He's saying to them that the glory they see on the mountain is the glory that accompanies them along this path of discipleship. That this glory is always present in Jesus, whether it's on Mount Tabor in this private revelation or publicly on the hill of Calvary, whether Jesus is being exalted or whether he's being humiliated, whether his garments are glistening or whether they've been torn and divided from him, whether he stands upon the mountain or whether he's mounted upon the cross, whether he's flanked by prophets and patriarchs or simply by common criminals, whether all is light or all is darkness, that Jesus is still the Lord, that he's still with them and his glory remains with them, that he's strengthening them for no matter what they might face in the future. And so what then does that mean for us? When you bring all of these things together, the fundamental truth of the Transfiguration is that we encounter Jesus' presence on the mountain of glory so we can trust in and know his presence on the road to glory. That God wants to reveal himself to us, that he wants us to know him and to know his love for us, that this revelation of his glory isn't just for a moment, but it's to strengthen us in our walk of discipleship, and that he wants us to know the touch of his glory on our mountaintop experiences, yes, but particularly in the darkness and in the valleys of our lives. And so as we come to Eucharist this morning, the invitation from the Lord is that we'd open ourselves to that renewed encounter, that revelation of his glory in our lives. Pope Francis is always inviting us back. He says, be open to that renewed personal encounter day after day after day. That Jesus would invite us to accept the call of discipleship to journey with him in a new way. You know, Alpha kicked off on Thursday. I've been told it's still not too late. So that might be a great way that you might want to respond by signing up for Alpha or another of the programs you run here in the parish to take up that call of discipleship in a new way. That Jesus is inviting us to get to know the one that we're journeying with. You might want to take up a chapter of a gospel a day. It will only take you about 10-15 minutes. Within 3 weeks, you'll have read an entire gospel. You might want to take up an additional way of praying, an extra 5 minutes in your day to spend with the Lord. That no matter how the Lord is inviting you in this feast of the Transfiguration, the invitation before each of us, as they would open ourselves to that encounter of the one who is revealed upon the mountain, because he wants to strengthen us for the road ahead, and he wants to touch us in our lives with his glory, particularly in the areas where we need him most.